Hi everyone, welcome back to the bookshelf, or welcome if you're new. I'm Grace, and today, it's a very exciting day. We are reading the hate reviews of some of my favorite books. This is what we're going with. It is quite the stack, as you can tell. And yes, I have been lifting a lot of 5-pound weights to be able to do that. It's very impressive. I'm coming for Jake Paul's title, I swear. Before we get started, make sure to follow me at grace.fountain daily so you don't miss any updates about upcoming videos, and make sure to subscribe down below for more book content, pop culture, reviews, and vlogs. In case it wasn't apparent from the title, I'm going to be taking some of my all-time favorite books, my ride or dies, the ones that I would defend in a court of law, and we are finding the absolute most scathing reviews on Goodreads, which is a platform known for roasting authors, books, anything that is deemed culturally inappropriate, any kind of incidents that happen in the books that are unsavory. It will be discussed on Goodreads. You bet your sweet pennies. So let's get into what each of the books are about in case you haven't read them, even though you should, because they're my favorites. And I'm offended if you haven't. Persuasion by Jane Austen is first. I know everyone says Pride and Prejudice tends to be their favorite Jane Austen novel, and for a reason. It is amazing. But Persuasion, in my mind, has the best adaptation. Controversial, I know, because of Keira Knightley and everything in the 2005 adaptation, but Dakota Johnson in Persuasion from 2022, that adaptation I think is one of the best Regency adaptations I've ever seen come to life. I'm just checking to make sure my mic is still recording. We had an incident in the last video. It is about a woman who doesn't quite fit in with her family, and her ex comes back into the village, the town, as it were, the hills and the valleys, and he is a captain now, and everyone is after him, and there's a lot of intrigue, you might say, into who dates who, the courtships, the dinners, the galas, the balls. And overall, I am terrified to see what people have to hate about this. Divine Rivals, which is you might say, rivals to lovers, enemies to lovers, story about two journalists in a fantasy world who become war correspondents on opposite sides. And it is kind of reminiscent of You've Got Mail, 10 Things I Hate About You, a lot of classic rom-com tropes, but in a Percy Jackson-ish universe, which I think adds a lot of flavor to it. I read this with my old book club, and a lot of people actually hated it. So I'm hoping the reviews don't hurt my feelings too much. Next book we're going to be going over is a classic. You might have seen the Netflix film back in January, but it is none other than People We Meet on Vacation by the Queen, Emily Henry, the BookTok romance beginner star, okay? She's one of the first ones that everyone thinks of when they think of modern romance, beach reads, because she literally has a book called Beach Read, Happy Place, Funny Story. She has a lot of different options. People We Meet on Vacation is, I think, one of 3 that I've read by her, and it's definitely my favorite. It's a lot of people's favorites. And it's about 2 best friends. They've known each other since college. It goes back and forth across different timelines, kind of like This Is Us. And I love it. It's Poppy and Alex, the classic rom-com leads. Tom Blythe. Obviously, we love him in any kind of movie. Very controversial one, which is Normal People by Sally Rooney. A lot of people... It's not popular, I'll put it this way. It's not popular that she doesn't use quotation marks in her writing. She has a very unconventional writing style. I don't think that makes it bad or unreadable. I think it just takes practice. And I think it just makes it less of a light read, which maybe some people are looking for more. Some people just want something they can read with their brain turned off. Some people want a more invigorating choice. Whichever one, Normal People might not be the book for you, but trust people will roast it alive on Goodreads if they do not like it, even though it is critically acclaimed as one of her greatest books and one of the greatest books about Ireland and teen romance and class differences. It is very well loved, but not by everybody. You know me at all. You know that I love The Story Collector by Evie Woods. If I could marry an author's books, it would be Evie Woods. She writes in a way where I feel like crying through the last third of every single one of her books. A girl who helps an American visitor translate fairy stories from Irish to English in her hometown. And that is like in the early 1900s, like 1910, 1911. And then there's also a present day storyline with a woman who is just ending a long term relationship and she comes to the town and she's kind of rediscovering herself. Eleanor Park by Rainbow Rowell. And this is a book about class differences and interracial romance in the 1980s between two teenagers in, I believe, Omaha. And it talks about family choices, found family. There's a lot of bullying and different family dynamics that go on, kind of Gilmore Girls-esque in that way. We've reviewed all the books, we've talked about what they are, so you're all caught up on the gossip. Let's get into the reviews. Okay, we've changed positions a little bit just so I can put the reviews here so you'll be able to see and read along with me. The first book that we're going to be talking about is Eleanor Park. I have scanned some of the reviews. It is a really mixed bag on a lot of these, so let's get started. So someone gave it 1 star and they said, should I break out in song and dance to Baba Black Sheep? 1 lonely star. I'm just as surprised as you are, considering I just knew going into Eleanor Park that I would love it. Love it, love it. Reason would I have to believe otherwise? Almost all of my friends loved this book and have sworn fealty to the goddess of feels and might, Rainbow Rowell. I do love this person's passion. They should just be a writer themselves. And I get it because she is a pretty awesome person and I think she's totally lovely. So trust me when I say I really wanted to love this book. In fact, I am blindsided that I didn't, saddened that I can't join the Eleanor Park Cool Kids fan club, and disappointed at such a disjointed reading experience. And then they went on to list random reasons why they didn't like this book, and I just included the first one because there was like 12. The romance. My main issue stems from the romance between Eleanor and Park. I just didn't get it. Though that's not for lack of trying, because I had many arguments with adult me and teen me in my brain. Teen me remembers the infatuation of meeting someone exciting and experiencing all those special moments for the first time. However, with Eleanor Park, it was entirely unrealistic and unbelievable. Do we agree? No, I do not. The romance between Eleanor and Park is completely believable, okay? They are teenagers, it's a small town. Both of them haven't exactly had a lot of options in terms of dating. So when you do meet someone that you really click with, you feel it that much more. And especially since they don't exactly have a lot of friends, friend groups, and they're alienated in their various ways, they really cling to each other that much more. It's kind of like a trauma bond almost. Next review. Chloe rated it 1 star. And she said, I read this years ago and loved it, but I need to change my rating because I would hate this if I read it now. Excuse me. First of all, if I had read this when I was a teenager, I probably wouldn't have understood a lot of the emotional undertones. I'm going to be totally honest. When I was a teenager, I basically only read historical fiction and nonfiction books, a lot of self-help. Okay, now we get into a really good review. There's some meat on this bone for us to analyze. The romance is both insta-love and gross. Like, I cringed throughout. It wasn't cute. It was, for want of a better word, weird. Eleanor frequently talks about wanting to eat Park's face. Honestly, what? They go from being absolute strangers to complete infatuation in 0 to 60 seconds. It's unrealistic and unbelievable, in my opinion. I couldn't relate to Eleanor, like, at all. I did also find this with Kath from, I think, the Fangirl book. So maybe this is just my issue with Roll's characters, but she irked me. I understood at times she felt deeply uncomfortable, but she frequently pushed that discomfort onto others around her, like when she first met Park's parents. I couldn't stand her family, which, to be fair, I think was the point, but they all pissed me off. That the entire neighborhood knew about her stepfather's behavior but did nothing was awful and absolutely terrible. I have a feeling this person did not grow up in a more sheltered environment, because if you grew up in an environment where maybe you witnessed some kind of family toxicity or someone else's family, people aren't real delighted to start opening up about that, especially in small towns and communities, especially when there's already a lot of division. People try to keep that on the down low. And also, insta-love Again, if you've been 15, you know what happens. You meet someone, you have some kind of common class or extracurricular club or whatever, or you live right down the street and you're just in love with them and you're convinced that you're going to marry them and that's it. And then you're kind of just in all of each other's mood boards and pictures and Instagrams. And honestly, the wanting to eat Parker's face thing, I mean, it's kind of like a cute aggression thing, right? Like, I don't find it weird. I just think that it's very accurate to like inner brain teenage thoughts. That's my opinion. And then this one is really funny because I included it because they put a GIF of Pitch Perfect that I thought was really funny. And it said, "You see, I typically give a book 100 pages before I decide if I like it or not. I gave Eleanor Park roughly 200 pages before I decided I couldn't take much more of this." And I think that's fair. Some people like their romance books more light and more beach ready. I Eleanor Park is a divisive book because it has so many heavy themes of like if you love La La Land. Like if La La Land is one of your favorite movies, you would love Eleanor and Park. But if you want to watch more like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, When Harry Met Sally, happy-ish movies, you're not really gonna want to read this book. And just because it's not written for you doesn't mean that it's bad, which I think a lot of people mistake when they read books. They think that if it's not written exclusively for them, and if they don't enjoy it, then it's just terrible. And I'm like, well, maybe it's just not for you. Maybe it's for like a different subset of the reading community. And then we are now moving on to The Story Collector, which someone gave this 1 star and just said irritating. I was surprised to find the author is Irish because this book seems too twee and sentimental. More of the sort of thing an American would write, perhaps. Well, Evie Woods is not American, I don't think. I may be being unfair. I was also largely irritated about the structure of the story. A large part is supposedly read from the diary of a young Irish woman writing about her experiences in 1910 by an American woman in Ireland in 2010. However, the diary extracts, apart from being in the first person, do not read like a diary. The diarist's family are described in the past tense, but in the diary, their personalities would more naturally be written about in the present tense. This is not how you would write a personal diary, but more a memoir written years later. This may seem a minor thing, but it continues to annoy me and undermine the authenticity of the narrative. After a few more chapters, I gave up. With 18 likes. How famous. Because if I was writing a book and it had a diary, you have to also fit it to the story. It's not just about the diary, it's not just about making it feel like a memoir, it's also about making sure that it fits within the narrative cohesion of the story. It's a writing device that's a bit lesser known. Not everyone can um, piece that together. But especially when you're writing like dual perspective, dual timeline stories, it's very difficult to do that in a way where the reader can still sort through the information and view it as a cohesive storyline. Miranda rated it 1 star and said, "I loved the premise of this story, but everything about it fell flat and felt unbelievable. Everything felt rushed and lame. There was one point where I asked aloud, what is this book trying to be? The story of Harold and Anna was much better than the present, and honestly, I would have loved to read the diary more in depth than whatever the F was happening in the present. 1 star is generous." Wow. Passion. Just so much passion here. I thought that The Story Collector perfectly captured how it feels when you know that you want to be with someone, but you cannot be with them. And that is exactly what happens in the last 100 pages of this book. And you learn in the present tense what happened back then, which I think is also one of the most heartbreaking tropes of a sad romance book is when something happens and you don't get a clear conclusion, but you have a feeling that it didn't work out. And then it speeds forward in time, kind of like Tuck Everlasting, and you learn that it didn't work out. And then Aaron rated it 1 star and said, "I wrote a short story in high school, and when I read it years later, I rolled my eyes and thought, wow, that was dumb. Reading The Story Collector was exactly the same experience." Honestly, I just found that funny. That's why I stuck it in there. Allison rated it 1 star again and said, "Thank God this is over, so I can read something good. I would have DNF'd this at 100 pages if I didn't need it for book bingo." You know what? congrats to the commitment. I try never to DNF books if I can help it because I want the Goodreads points so badly. I hated the writing style. It took forever to have anything actually happen, and then the ending was stupidly unsatisfying. Excuse me. I just talked about the ending. It was magical. It was mystical magical. Also, there were numerous mistakes in the book, both grammatical and formatting. Okay, I didn't notice that. I did not notice that. Like, this is definitely one where I wonder if I read a different book than everyone else because it's rated so high and I really hated it. Well, Allison, um, you might just not like romance, mystery, dual timeline. This is us La La Land stories, and that's okay. And then we move on to the persuasion reviews, which I admit it was hard to find negative ones because the classic book community tends to revere Jane Austen as kind of like the reigning queen. So it's really hard to find anything below a 3-star. Adina gave it 3 stars though, and she said, another book read based on my newfound love for classic novels. Congratulations, welcome to the community. I did not find it as good as Pride and Prejudice, but it still was an enjoyable experience. 42 likes. I get Pride and Prejudice is the one that everybody likes, but I do think Persuasion might be a little bit better. We have maybe my favorite exchange I've ever seen on Goodreads. If you think that Reddit has beef, you got nothing. Because listen to this masterpiece. So Barry Pierce gave Persuasion 2 stars. And he said, meh. Just meh. I've the same thoughts on this as I have on P and P, which I assume is Pride and Prejudice, for those that can't spell it out. Way too many characters, lots of sitting around chatting, no real drama. That's what the culture was. There's a lot of sitting around and chatting. Seriously, the most dramatic thing that happens in this novel is a lady faints. Not exactly Heathcliff digging up the dead body of Kathy, now is it? Oh, I just know, even though this review is from 2013, I just know this guy loved Wuthering Heights so much. I seriously want to like Jane Austen, but from the 2 novels that I've read by her, I'm finding that task hard. Alright then. Already, I know exactly what it would be like to be in college with this guy. I'm not gonna lie. Someone commented and answered him 7 years later, by the way, at 5:30 in the morning, and said, I thought you loved books where nothing happens. I haven't read this one yet, and this review is old. Don't know what I'm doing here. Honestly, that's one of the sickest burns I've ever seen. I thought you loved books where nothing happens. Why, Mika, you should be a Reddit moderator. Loretta rated it 3 stars. Again, very hard to find anything below a 3 stars. And it said, for me, nothing Jane Austen wrote compares to my beloved Pride and Prejudice. That being said, for me, Persuasion's love story, which is supposed to be her most moving love story ever, bothered me. I thought the characters, mainly Anne's father and her annoying sisters, Elizabeth and Mary, were stiff, and the love story between Anne and Captain Wentworth was flat. In Pride and Prejudice, I could immediately feel the tension and heat between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. That is very true. Pride and Prejudice had very palpable chemistry between the 2 main characters. I will say it seems like a lot of people struggle more with finding like the emotional depth and emotional themes of Persuasion, in which case I would recommend reading Jane in Love by Rachel Givney, because that changes your perspective on Persuasion forever, and it is one of my favorite time travel books. On to Normal People, because that is one of TikTok's most popular YA romance books, and people have a lot of thoughts about whether it should have been more critically acclaimed, whether it was too critically acclaimed, whether the writing was terrible. Luce gave it 2 stars and said, disclaimer, I understand that Normal People is very popular and much beloved. While I recognize that Rooney has talent, I found Normal People to be a mediocre read. If you dislike reading reviews expressing opinions different from your own, well, I suggest you skip this review. There are plenty of glowing reviews out there for this novel, so there really is no need for you to waste your time leaving me a comment along the lines of, you are wrong and here's why. Well, then don't post on the internet, sweetie, because that's all people do. Also note that I wrote this review in 2018 and not recently. If you believe that characters who dislike themselves, shrug a lot, and say, I don't know 24/7 are very deep and realistic, well, this may be the perfect read for you. Dang, son. I mean, you can't roast people like that and then expect them not to comment. They're gonna comment. Goodreads is known for coming after anyone who hates their favorite books, myself included. That's why I made this video. I don't think that it has unrealistic dialogue. I think that, first of all, it's a different culture. How people talk in Ireland, the teenage culture of that time, probably a little bit different than what we're used to in America or England. This is one of the most overrated books I've read in a long time, and I'm stunned it was longlisted for the Women's Prize and Booker Prize. But then I usually dislike what's chosen for that. Okay. The critics are gushing over it too. A professional review I saw in BookPage calls it wise and wondrous. I asked, how? How is Rooney's message wise? Show me what's wondrous. I've read wondrous and wise many times before. Those are the transportive books I never forget. I'd love some examples. They overwhelm me in the best way. Everything about normal people underwhelmed me. Though Rooney's simplistic prose makes normal people easy to read, the book is poorly organized, overly sexual, plotless, and ultimately never comes together in a satisfying way. Considering how ordinary, often boring most people's lives are, her book actually is about normal people. But I expect authors to dress up the everyday. I expect tension, some drama, maybe a little suspense. I need a plot with a compelling reason for being. Normal people's lives don't make for good stories as they are, they require tinkering. I think that's a very interesting theory that you need to kind of tinker with the ordinary. I don't think so, because what happens when I read a book that is about someone who has a very simplistic job or there's a very clear routine day to day in the chapters is you start to do what the person does in the book, which is when there's monotony, your brain starts to fill in the gaps and you start to imagine things. And to me, the book becomes more interpretive, where you can add more of your own life to it and it's more of an interactive experience. And then someone said, on the second page of Sally Rooney's universally acclaimed Booker longlisted novel is the following paragraph. He puts his hands in his pockets and suppresses an irritable sigh, but suppresses it with an audible intake of breath, so that it still sounds like a sigh. What? I get the hand in the pockets bit, but how the hell does the rest of it work? The sigh is an exhalation, and I have no idea how any attempt to suppress a sigh by inhaling could possibly sound like one. Shall I do a demonstration? I feel like his name is Brandon. I don't know why, but for some reason, the fact that he took a whole book and just is analyzing, like, the breathing verbiage, I find funny. Um, a sigh is an exhalation, but you do an inhale, okay? So, like, then we move on to people we meet on vacation, which is very beloved, so I couldn't find a lot of negative reviews. But someone said, this book had a very lighthearted feel, which was nice after the last book that I read that was literally so dark that I was having nightmares. Okay, I do love true crime, so I'd love to know what book that is actually, so I can read it too. However, it was entirely predictable. After about halfway through, I was wondering, okay, can we just get there already? These romance books really bother me because they are so unrealistic. Poppy lives in New York and has a jet set lifestyle, while Alex still lives in their small Midwest town in Ohio, working as a teacher at the public high school. But the characters are so quick to give up everything in their lives. In the real world, some things can't be changed so easily. Yes, this is true, but that's why it's a romance book, because escapism. It's a lovely term, and people just adore it. Someone said, unpopular opinion, this book was 50% boring and 50% annoying. Well, it is an unpopular opinion, I'll give you that much. And then Elizabeth rated it 1 star and said, reading this book is like seeing your preteen cousin at Christmas and them telling you about every single inside joke they ever had with their BFF in one long run on sentence as you feel your last brain cell suffocate and die. This, honestly, is one of the best sentences that I've ever read, even though it is actually a run on sentence, which is what she talks about hating, which I think is a bit ironic. Renata rated Divine Rivals, so now we're into our little romantasy Percy Jackson book. And she said the world building is so bad at some point, the male character says he loves summer because it's when baseball season is back. They use lifts and have electricity, but use typewriters and dress very English Victorian vibes. But the war resembles the fighting strategies they'd use in World War One. And there's magic and gods, and just when you think you've settled into this early 20th century world, something else is added to the story, and it makes you wonder if it's actually more of a Napoleonic vibe. The romance is horrible, the dialogue is cringe, and it does not even allow you to have a cozy, fun read. It's just strange. I think I love it that there's different elements from different timelines and that it's depending on which kind of favorite war you have and what historical fiction is your favorite, there's something for everyone. I think that's very exciting when books have that. And I think that it's more genre bending as well because it's not just sticking to one clear box. It's talking about a lot of different eras and it's, the Eras tour, if you will. And then Mayo gave it 2 stars and said, so much potential wasted. This book literally takes place in the middle of a war with gods, and all we get is a magical typewriter and a bland rivals to lovers romance. Maybe I should have picked the author's other book, was my first book. Maybe I should have picked the author's other book, was my first book. What? First book is going to focus more on like establishing the characters and like the world and the conflicts a little bit, but the second book definitely goes into the war, and it has more suspense and drama and cliffhangers. So I would recommend sticking it out, trying book 2. And then she said, she writes letters like I did when I was heartbroken at 13 over my Minecraft boyfriend. I never had a Minecraft boyfriend, but I did play a lot of Minecraft, and I can confirm that you do get very, very attached to your sheep farms and your chicken barns. But I found the letters very like rom-com-y, kind of like in You've Got Mail when you can like hear the voiceover of them reading the letters and you're like looking out over the cozy skylines and apartments. Like that's what it felt like. It felt very realistic to me. He rated it 1 star and said DNF'd at 57%. So close. You were over halfway through. I feel like I read a completely different book to everyone else. I went in with high expectations due to the hype, but ended up being disappointed. A great concept, but it was poorly done. And then she goes on to talk about like lack of world building. I didn't really need much world building, to be honest. I think it depends on what you're looking for in like a fantasy book. Some people really want all the world building. And for that, I would say Six of Crows. Definitely read Six of Crows. But if you want character driven stuff, Divine Rivals is perfect. I don't think it's less than just because it has a lack of world building. Thank you so much for watching this video. I have definitely learned a lot, and I think that it's so important to critically evaluate books and talk about what you liked, what you didn't like, and definitely what we can all discuss. I think that reading books should be one of the most positive spaces on the internet. I definitely have a lot of fun on here. It can be a little brutal on Goodreads though. And if you had a great time as well, make sure to like and subscribe and maybe leave a little comment about what books you loved or hated from my list of favorites. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!